Welcome to the Marketing Meeting podcast. I'm happy to host Dr. Jeffrey Funk today. He's an expert on the diffusion of new technologies. He has spent over 40 years as a professor and technology consultant advising companies and universities. You might have seen him sharing his insights in MarketWatch, Fast Company, and also in my case, I see him a lot on LinkedIn. His upcoming book, Unicorns, Hype, and Bubbles, will be released in October. Welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much for joining me at this very early hours of the day. But technology couldn't change the time, different time zone differences, and cannot, work on that. This episode is different for me because many of the guests that I've been interviewing for AI, marketing, and brands are usually sharing an optimistic perspective around the technology and AI. However, I know that you're a voice of reason and you balance skepticism and optimism around the technology in a good place, in my opinion. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. You have been you were one of the first person to recognize the potential for smartphones during the early 2000s, not 20s, 2000s. Could you talk a bit about that? And while you are talking about it, I would like to also understand, how do you evaluate the potential and sustainability of a new technology?
Okay. Well, I got interested in Japan. Back in the 1980s, Japan is number one. I was trying to understand how Japan was doing well. How could they develop new products quickly? So I moved to Japan full time in 1996 and was looking at a number of products, but one of them was mobile phones. And it was just by accident then that when NTT Docomo introduced their iMode service in February of 1999, it did much better than any of the services in Europe. And it was the only country with successful service until Korea launched them a few years later. But the iPhone didn't really come out to 2007. It starts skinning in 2008. So I was visiting lots of Japanese companies. My Japanese was pretty good. I probably visited hundreds of Japanese companies, asking them about their various mobile phone services. And one of the things I realized is that a lot of it revolved around, you get better phones, you get a better processor, more memory, better display, the resolution in color, or just overall better network speeds. Those things enabled companies to introduce new services. So there was a very tight link. Companies were very specific about what they were introducing, why they were introducing it, because the phones had gotten better. So that allowed them to give better services. And the rest of the world wasn't able to do so well because the standards weren't set very well. The network operators, NT Docomo and others, kind of determined what would be in the phones to make sure that the phones worked right. And Nokia and other leading phone makers at the time didn't like that. So things didn't work out. So that was that was something was very educational for me in terms of how markets grow and the relationship between the underlying technology and the services that companies were able to offer.
Mm-hmm. I think in 2007, you taught a unique course on the economics of new technologies. And then that's also the start about being a early critic about the startups and also the venture capitalists, in my opinion. And,
I was very excited about what happened in Japan and what I learned. So I wanted to talk about that in this course. And it actually started in like 2009. And so I started talking about lots of different technology. And every year I was increasing the number of technologies I talked about. And I had a lot of students. I had, 50 projects a year being done, group projects being done. And so I would learn a lot from the projects because I would require them to go beyond what I talked about in class. So they would talk about something new, and then I would incorporate that in the next semester's course. And so I covered just an immense number of technologies. I taught this up until 2016. And by then I was doing big data, and there was some mentions of AI. But over that time, from like 2009, 2007 years I was teaching it, I became a pessimist because I began to notice that a lot of the technology I was talking about hadn't really gotten much better than when I'd previously taught it. So things like nanotechnology and superconductors for energy and bioelectronics and those kinds. So I noticed they weren't getting better. So they obviously weren't, and if something didn't get better, then it wasn't going to diffuse. If it's not being used, it has to get a lot better before it's going to be used. But it wasn't getting better. So I began to become a pessimist. I also, at the tail end of that 2016, and right after that, I noticed that a lot of these startups weren't making money. There was a lot of anecdotal data about losses. So I began to become more pessimistic, and the list of the list of technologies for which I was optimistic became less and less, and that continued after I left NUS in the late 2010s.
You talk a lot about value and progress when it comes to evaluating the technologies. I think that's something that's really stuck into my mind. So what's the value and what's the progress? Is there a progress, the technology is progressing, and what's the value that's adding to our lives? And from there, I would like to touch base on the marketing side of things.
Yeah. Well, value, what are the customers getting? And the first thing you want to know is, are the customers using it? And you want to get an idea of, there's always going to be somebody using it, almost always. Maybe some like some technologies are too far in the future, Einstein-Rosenberg bridge or something, it's too far away that it's not being used, but most technologies are. So you can always find some people using it. And then you want to find out what benefits they're getting, how much money they're spending. And then you ask the question, okay, they're using this technology. They have these problems with X and Y, but they like Z. Okay, is X and Y getting better? Where is the progress? You have to be very specific. Too many people think, they just see all the products coming out and they just see, oh, there's so much progress, so much is happening. And they hear all these statements by the tech bros just saying, oh, this is going to happen, that's going to happen. And they mistake that for progress. They think that, oh, there's so much talk about it, there's so much progress. So wait, you got to be very specific about the performance metric you're concerned with and whether there's progress in the relevant performance metric.
In March 2024, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, said AI will handle 95% of marketing work done by agencies and creatives. He also added it's going to be easy, instant, and almost at no cost. He's giving it a 5 years, give or take, maybe slightly longer. This is a bold statement, and it's been like a lot of people in marketing world has been discussing it in non-marketing world as well. What are your thoughts about this prediction?
Well, Sam Altman is not an expert on marketing. He has not spent his life doing marketing. He has no idea what marketing people do, And Mira Marathi is the same way. She says, well, it's going to replace all creatives, but maybe those jobs shouldn't have been in the first place. You see, they display this lack of knowledge about the intricacies of work. And you can say that marketing or a lot of stuff are superfluous, but they're there for a reason. Companies do them for a reason, right? So, and there's a lot of details in there they do for a reason. So you have to understand those reasons. You can make these forecasts. So Sam Altman is trying to sell OpenAI, and he's not really trying to sell you on using it. He's trying to sell investors on saying it's really big, because that's how you make money in today's world. It used to be that you started a business, you satisfied some customers, then you made it a little better, you satisfied some more customers, and the revenues grew. And after a few years, people said, that's kind of a good technology, and there's a lot of revenues there. That's a good business. Yeah, I think we should increase the value of that company, either in the stock market or private valuations. But Sam Altman and others don't like that. They want to convince you that it's worth billions, and trillions. I mean, people throw around these terms all the time, trillions of dollars. And so Sam Altman writes these articles. Like a few years ago, he wrote one that said the Moore's law of everything, houses and everything was going to get cheaper because of ChatGPT. And when people say these things, these outrageous things that there's no basis of fact, the logical response is, This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But for some reason, these investors have bought into this, which of course should lead to the end that, well, maybe these investors don't know what they're talking about because, this isn't happening. I mean, what you want to do is focus on exactly what's happening with ChatGTP. What exactly is happening? Who's using it and why? There are people using it. And there are cases where it seems to be offering some value. But you want to focus on that. You don't want to stay at this very broad level of Sam Altman says this is going to happen and therefore we're going to believe him. No, you focus on specifically what's going on right now, what value users are getting right now, where is the actual progress, and you make your own forecast, right? Don't just believe someone's forecast. You try to understand their logic and repeat their logic and be able to repeat their logic and make their argument.
I think the way the reason why many people believe in him, well, there are also some other obvious reasons why people believe in him, but marketing, especially in the B2B world, marketing is seen as content marketing. And we have head of content, VP of content, acting as if they are the marketing managers or directors of the company. Whereas, when you think about generative AI, it's about creating content. And if you think that marketing is creating content, then you would assume that, ChatGPT or generative AI would replace the role of marketers. I think that's also one of the reasons to that. And I really like how you start talking about predictive AI versus generative AI and those things, because predictive AI is just seeing the future and forecasting it through machine learning, which has been already in the lives of so many professors, so many researchers. Whereas generative AI is about creating content. Maybe that's my take on that as a marketer.
Well, generative AI is going to have a bigger impact on marketing than a lot of their functions because the output of generative AI is words and images. So it's not going to have a big impact on making cars or constructing houses or mining minerals or catching fish or even doing healthcare, because the output is words. The output of words and images is very different from the output of the industry I just mentioned. There's very different things. And so marketing, yes, it will have an impact. I mean, a lot of marketing is advertising videos. Okay, well, then, yeah, I agree. It will help you make videos. I think it also help make movies and TV shows. It's not like they're going to make a whole movie, make a whole TV show, but they help in certain places. And then gradually over time, the contribution from generative gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's simply how I would do the forecast, because this is the way technologies change very gradually. And there's some impact of marketing on words. But you see, when you're using marketing, you're really talking about advertising. And I would say that marketing is much bigger because marketing is a lot about understanding what the market for something is. That's very hard. That's what we're doing right now for generative AI. We're trying to understand what the market is for that. And I don't see how generative AI is going to help me determine what the market for generative AI is. The market for generative AI comes about by having the conversation we're having right now and thinking through what's happening in the market and the uptake and who's using it and who isn't.
The other day, a friend of mine, he's a creative director, and we were talking about a commercial and then, just making positive, negative comments and criticizing that. And then he was like, why do we still do ads? I mean, it's so old school because, we know that, for example, paid media, it's not working as it used to be in the past. So things may be evolved in that sense as well. I mean, of course, marketing is not only about advertising or ads, it's a part of it. But I think things might shift around that. So I would like to ask you about your opinion about the role of human creativity in marketing. As AI is continuing to evolve, do you see like phases of human creativity advancing with AI as the technology improves?
Well, I'm not an expert on marketing creativity. I mean, I've seen a few movies and things and read some things. Most of it appears like, you've got to have some core idea for some words that are going to describe the new product, and then you try to express those words in some images. And so coming up with the idea is very difficult. Now, I can imagine that generative AI can help you try those ideas out very much more quickly. So you can create some videos. You have some words, and you think this sounds like a good marketing campaign for the product, and then you input the words, and you get a bunch of images, and so you can try things much faster with generative. So I'm a complete believer. So I believe that that's going to happen. That can help, and that very good creatives are going to use it well. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people trying, but unless you're really creative in the first place, you're not going to be able to use the generative AI very well. It's not going to be very impactful.
I think I see it in a way. For example, Adobe is a creative platform that you can use, generate graphics and so on. And it's a big tool for the creatives, like the designers and so on. So when if we think that way, I mean, a graphic designer was a graphic designer 100 years ago, and it's a graphic designer now, but with the tools of Adobe, and then it's more enhanced. I see it in that way. I mean, it doesn't necessarily diminish the role and make the role fade away in the past, and but I see this as an enhancement of the creativity process.
Well, it'd be very incremental. I mean, it'd be very incremental. I mean, think of some of the things that people say. Computers, I mean, AI isn't going to replace people. People who use AI are going to replace people who don't use AI. And they never really talk about what they mean by that. I mean, you think about people who use computers replacing people who didn't use computers, right? Everybody uses computers now. So obviously they've replaced the people who didn't use computers. The AI people kind of think, okay, I know AI and all these statistics and all this has become necessary in the future. And that's going to be the future. I think, well, wait a minute. The people who are using computers today don't really know computer architecture, know how computers work. They certainly don't know how semiconductors work and all these integrated circuits work. They don't know any of that. They know a bunch of, kind of superficial stuff about computers, about how to use the software, and you click here, you click there, and it can do this, it can do that. And where do you find information? All this stuff that a true engineer would say is superficial, but it's necessary to do your job. I see AI as being the same way. It's going to require people to understand some, prompt engineering type thing. It may require them to understand something about statistics and things like that, and how often something makes errors, but probably not. It's probably going to be more, well, it makes these kinds of errors, so you have to check for those kinds of errors. And it doesn't make these kinds of errors, so you can usually trust it when it says this. And that will take a while to understand when you can trust it, what type of things you can trust it with, and what type of things you can't. And you get these videos, and sometimes they produce an extra arm or a leg or something like that, and which may hurt you. They may also give you some historically or something inaccurate. But you may say, well, for these kinds of videos, marketing videos, we don't care about the accuracy so much. It's not like we're doing a documentary where we have to have the people look exactly the way they actually looked 150 years ago. And so these are the kinds of things that I think that people will have to learn. They'll have to learn when AI makes, what are the advantages and disadvantages. And you can't just say, wow, it's early years of AI, it's going to get so good and everything is perfect. No, it's not going to get perfect. It's going to get a little better, but not a lot. And so you better understand where it works and where it doesn't work so well. And that's going to be the challenge.
In terms of, going out of the marketing scope for a bit, but are there any specific AI applications that you believe the game changers for businesses? Because a lot of companies are investing heavily on AI without knowing too much about it, or just trying to jump to the wagon and helping it. Do you see some specific areas that will make the most impact, especially when you look to the 1 or 2 years horizon?
Well, I think these advertising videos, and then a lot of editing or videos and TV shows is the biggest. I think that the generative AI and the tech side will have less of an impact because there isn't a lot. There's books and things, but my understanding is the books that are written with generative aren't that good. And it's really hard to write a best-selling book. Really hard. Even lots of smart people can't. It's very hard. So I don't see generative AI having much of an impact there.
You mean in like book writing, copywriting, on those areas?
I mean, like writing a book, like and helping an author write a book. Maybe it can help checking, maybe editing a book, and you're looking for some inconsistencies or something. But I have a feeling that it's not going to be that big a deal. There are some other areas that people like to talk about. I mean, certainly software coding, but it appears that software generative AI makes too many errors, creates too much software code. So it proposes solutions that have too many characters, right? You don't want to have too many lines of code, right? We already have too many lines of code. These software solutions, just millions of lines of code, and then somebody has to check them and figure out where there's a problem. And so if you're using generative AI that creates more code than a human would for a particular problem, to solve a particular problem, it's going to be harder to check. And that kind of gets me to what one of the big things I emphasize, which is process. A lot of these economists and stuff, they think it's too complicated to think about processes. And so they just focus on tasks. And they have these 10 tasks, and generative AI can help you with each task. And the user will just go from this tool to that tool. And this isn't the way the world works. This isn't what enabled productivity to improve. You see, I began a lot of my early career was in just-in-time manufacturing and processes. It wasn't about a person just seeing how many parts they could produce and let them stack up in the corner. No, it was producing just in time. So you didn't have, so that there was close feedback between the downstream process and the upstream process in order to make sure things were done right. That's how you achieved lower defects and how you improve the productivity of factories. And the same thing was done product development. People looked at this back in the early 90s. Books came out on how Japan was able to develop products faster than other companies in the world because they were doing a lot of things concurrently. People were collaborating very closely and not just having it pass downstream and then pass downstream and then pass downstream. They were doing work at the same time, concurrently, sharing ideas. Now, I have a suspicion that in the marketing field, there's a lot of collaborative work, a lot of sharing of ideas, right? And the good ideas are partly from collaboration. There may be some core ideas, that the stars produce, but putting it all together, making sure that it all works well, that message works well, the advertising video works well, requires a lot of collaboration. So you have to think about process. So you have to think about how is generative AI going to help in that process, that creative process. So understand what has to be done in that creative process, and how you catch errors, and when errors aren't caught, what's the implications. So this is important, I believe, for any application for AI. It's all about process, understanding processes. And I'm not the first to come up with this. There was a best-selling book around 1990 called Reengineering the Corporation by James Champion and Michael Hammer. It was all about this, and it just had all these simple examples of processes and companies and how there was a lot of work that they realized wasn't really necessary, and other work that was more important, and work that needed to be done in parallel. So in order to implement AI really well, people need to think about their processes. What are the processes? Don't just think about my work. That's what a lot of these proponents of generative AI are doing. They're just talking about their work. Oh, it improves my productivity like crazy. Says one crypto CEO commenting on my post, and it's like, I wonder what this guy's doing. He's just writing messages on LinkedIn, and he says, wow, this is really helping me. But it's not getting any work done. It's not improving the productivity of anything. And
Yeah.
so we need people to think in depth about this. And I know people are. There's people, but there's a lot of people aren't. And one of them is Sam Altman, right? Because Sam Altman doesn't understand any of this, or at least his comments suggest he doesn't understand. Mira Murati doesn't. Her comments suggest she doesn't understand it. And there's a whole lot of people who aren't talking about this. And, even economists, I have problems with a lot of economists who they do these studies and they don't refer to these things. They just talk about, oh, the average person in a call center was able to use generative AI to write faster than they used to. They don't talk about what happens when they make an error, right? When they make an error and something gets transmitted to a client that's wrong, there's a process by which that has to be fixed. They're not talking
Mhm.
about that, right? But
Mhm.
yet these processes are important. When there are errors, how do we deal with them? There's a process, right? And you have to think about how is generative AI going to impact it on the process as a whole.
Mhm. The other day, I was reading another professor's note, which says marketers need to learn how to talk to a machine, meaning that how to talk with generative AI, because SEO, search engine optimization, would not work as it is working right now. So you have to understand how to work with generative AI, which means people start to use Perplexity, ChatGPT to do search. And he says that this is different than how we used to do SEO. So, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, some people use the term prompt engineer. You need to know what to prompt it with, uh, and I think that's way too simplistic. I mean, what they're really saying is what I said earlier. You have to understand when it makes errors, when it doesn't, when you can trust it, when you can't. We all did this with Google search engine, right? We all look for information with the search engine, and we know that if we ask what's the population of Australia, then most likely the first number it gives you is correct. But
Yeah.
if you're asking about something more complicated, like who should I vote for, Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, well, there's going to be some controversy in there. And, a lot of things are in between those two, but nevertheless, you're going to have to understand when you think the generative AI gives you, when you can trust the answers and when you can't, and how you ask things such that you're more likely to get a more accurate answer. So you have to understand the technology, which I was mentioning earlier.
Mhm. For example, I started doing some search when I'm using ChatGPT or Perplexity. So I started doing search on brands, saying that okay, what's the best brand for milk, oat milk, those type of things. In order to understand how the search option works. But the thing is that. Uh, it's not like the search that we have at Google right now. Of course, Google search is also quite skewed because of all the, SEO, all the branding and ads. But it's not there yet. So I think it's just like a game of, all these seven companies trying to win, because Google search is a big thing. And now people are suddenly using ChatGPT or Perplexity to do search. I think that's some other thing around this topic. Your book is coming up in October. How long does it take for you to write the book?
Well, writing is very easy. I mean, if you spend your life writing, it's very easy to write. It's hard to get a book published. So I've much of this book was written 3 years ago, and I was trying so hard to get it published because, see, I noticed these things so long ago. I was warning about the startup losses back in 2018, 2019, because I had anecdotal evidence that most startups were losing money. And over time, I got better and better data. But you know what? People don't care. The
uh,
VCs and the startup companies, they don't care because they want to hide this. And the professors who teach entrepreneurship, they want to hide this. They all want to hide this. And it hasn't
what?
blown up because there's so much easy money. So these startups, they can't make money. I mean, 90% of these unicorn startups are losing money, but they can survive because they just cut back on their growth. They just cut back, but they're not ever going to make money. And people use this term zombie company that has losses, big losses. but it has enough revenues to pay for the interest on that debt, they're not going to recover. So this is what I've been dealing with and trying to convince publishers this is an issue. I mean, publishers are like, academic publishers, first of all, are hard because they will publish these kinds of books, but if you're not really famous, right, they can't, it's not only that they won't publish you, they can't get anybody to review your book because a famous professor isn't going to review a non-famous professor. So then you have to go to the business books, the how-to books, but you have to how to do something. You see, so my book is about how to avoid investing in bad companies and in bubbles and things like that. I'm not an investment person. That's not my expertise. But I had to write this kind of book because that's what the publishers want. They want a how-to book, how to do something. So I'm trying to tell people how to interpret market signals and things.
So I will have two questions about that, because you are often highlighting the excessive hype of AI, and the book is about unicorns, hype, and bubbles. Do you foresee a crisis stemming around the overhype of AI in the coming years?
Well, if you add up the increase in market capitalization for the top tech companies since January 2023, you come up with a figure of 10 trillion. Now, I'm the only person that noticed this, I guess, because I never see anybody mention it. Because when I say 10 trillion out there, a lot of people say, where'd you get that number? Where'd you get that number? Because no one else says it. But it's 10 trillion. I mean, all you have to do is go through Microsoft, Google, all these companies. I mean, it's huge. I mean, Microsoft's share price has almost doubled since January 2023. You add it up, it's $10 trillion. That's a lot of money. And you look at, the revenues for this AI. I mean, yeah, the cloud company revenues, but the actual software revenues are very small. And other people have noticed that with that the biggest is probably a few billion for OpenAI, but none of these other companies. And Microsoft just announced some earnings, and they don't say anything about Copilot, number of Copilot users, amount of Copilot revenues. And of course, that's what Alphabet stock caused Alphabet stock to drop last week, was they didn't say anything about revenues. They didn't say probably any details. And so people are beginning to notice, so wait a minute, we expect to see these kinds of details. We just don't want to hear about, well, your advertising revenues went up 20% since last year, that's pretty good. Most companies would not have this performance. But the problem is that Microsoft revenues had gone up 20% in the last year. And that's pretty good. But the stock price doubled. It's up like 2 trillion in market capitalization. We're looking for bigger numbers than just a 20% increase. We're looking for something that suggests that all of this hype about AI, this increase in market capitalization of $10 trillion is warranted, is justified. So that's what the market's looking for. So at some point, the market's going to say, well, it isn't there. I know some people will say, well, they're just not talking about the Copilot number of Copilot users and revenues, but they're there. They're going up. And one thing I've learned through my life is that companies will brag if they get the chance. If they have something to brag about, they're going to brag about it. So if there were some good numbers there, they would be talking about them. They wouldn't be shy. People aren't shy. These companies aren't shy. They're concerned about their share price. It's their primary concern. They're going to do anything to move that share price up. So if they had these numbers, if they had good numbers for Copilot, Microsoft would talk about them.
I mean, on my side from the advertising world, I'm expecting that OpenAI will start getting ads for the search results, that they are just like Google search, you get the paid ads. And I'm waiting for the moment that these companies, generative AI companies, are now turning into advertising companies, taking ads.
No, that's a very good point. I mean, some of us raised that a year ago when people talking about OpenAI is going to eliminate, Google search because it's going to be able to do better. The first question is, well, how are they going to monetize it? Or one question is, how are they going to monetize it? Are they going to charge people for it? If not, how are they going to offer ads? And so those kinds of details, they never came out. And when they don't come out, what do you conclude? Well, they don't have an answer to it. They don't have one. Sam Altman is again just talking around the issue. It's not that you have a bad question, that you're misunderstanding things. No, you're right on. You understand it. That's the problem. That's the question you got to keep asking. And the reason that Sam Altman and Mira Moriarty aren't answering the questions because they don't have a good answer. They don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine that they're not going to come up with a good way to do it.
How about the second question and the last question about the book is what are the insights, like what's one insight that you can give to avoid these pitfalls about hypes and bubbles?
Well, what I say is you have to understand. You just don't listen to people's forecasts like Sam Altman. You have to understand them. You have to understand this. You have to be doing the forecast yourself. You're understanding the logic behind the forecast. And so one part is about startups, and all these startups are losing money. And a big reason they're losing it is because they didn't do a technologically sophisticated business. And when you look back at all the successful startups over the past 50, 60 years, there's like semiconductor companies, like networking companies, computer companies, software companies. It was all something technologically new that enabled this new startup to succeed. You can go through any from Oracle, Microsoft. They all did something radically new that wasn't being done that was much better. Well, that's not the case with a lot of these food delivery startups and even healthcare startups. And there's nothing really new. It's kind of something very small. Now, for the companies that did offer new technology, they tried for the main market. So think about VR and AR. And we've been hearing about VR and AR I've been hearing about it for 30 years. And certainly with startups, you go back to Oculus Rift that was acquired by Facebook more than 10 years ago. People have been talking about this a long time. And here we are. Even Apple can't do well with it. So my conclusion is they all kind of assumed that this was easy, and my book goes into the reasons why it's not easy. So a lot of ways, my book goes into how the progress is very slow in these technologies, and the companies should have been aiming for a much simpler thing. Some niche user, right? You got to understand that niche user, someone who's willing to pay a lot of money for something that isn't that great. Now, this is the case all the time with new technologies. You have to find that niche user who's willing to pay for something that's not that good, and but they didn't. And so I show that the progress is very slow on all kinds of these technologies. And now I know that a lot of marketing people say, "Oh, I don't want to go into this stuff," and whether it's progressing or whether, but that's the core of understanding whether it's going to be big, right? Is it progressing? So when I was, a young man in graduate school, personal computers were big in the early 80s, and I wasn't really following it very closely, but it was hard to avoid because I was at Carnegie Mellon and it was in the news, and we had to use computers to write our articles, to write papers and things. As people were talking about Moore's Law all the time, and about how it was the computers would get faster and faster and faster because there's a direct link between the better transistors and the faster computers. So that was very easy to forecast. And now you look at generative AI and you think, well, are the frequency of hallucinations going down? People talk about all these new products and, they have higher resolution, and I can use these inputs to get these outputs, but that's not the core question. To me, it's all about what is keeping people from using more generative AI for text or even for video. It's hallucinations. So are the frequency of hallucinations going down? I see a little impact, but not much. And so that's what the book is about. It's about all these performance metrics, about thinking about a technology, like drone delivery or, even Starlink, thinking about how much faster, how much better is it getting? How fast is it getting better? That's a core question. If you want to think about a new technology, it has to be getting better really fast, or else it's not going to go from little use to lots of use.
I mean, one of the questions that I had, I mean, I feel that I'm also on the correct path of asking those questions, because I was interviewing with someone, and then she says that now I can, instead of creating one post in an hour, I can create 100 posts in an hour. And I said, I mean, why would you need 100 posts?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
the
But
reason to that? I mean, like, there's only like a few people that you can talk, and those
yeah.
people can consume that much of so much of content. Why
Yeah.
would you need to produce 100? I mean, I don't want to produce that.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that thinking, I'm happy that I was able to talk to you, because I also, you know, watch a lot of your videos, and that's also shifted a lot of thinking.
Yeah.
Two last questions about more lifestyle. What is one book that you would recommend reading?
About this topic? Well, I'm
Any
sure
topic.
that Gary Marcus's book is going to be very good. It comes out in September. Um, I like Emmanuel Maggiordi's book, Silicon, which comes out in September, but he also wrote a
Okay.
book last year, Smart Until Dumb, about AI. They're very funny books. I mean, I've read the book Silicon that's coming out. He sent me an advance copy, but they're very funny books, you know. So my book isn't funny like that, because he has been working with these people and these projects, and he's talking about the things they say, and you know, a lot of these crazy things where, like in AI, you know, they didn't need AI to solve a problem, but they used AI because it would look better on the resumes and it looked better as a project description, and so he's talking about really the source of the hype. You know, that people want to talk about AI because it makes them look good. They can put it on the resume. It makes them look like they're really advanced. Uh, so those books are good. There are others. I mean, you can read Darren Acemoglu's
Yeah.
new book this year, but it's more academic. Most
Yeah.
most practitioners don't want to read academic books. It's got too much theory and stuff. And so these kind of funny books are better.
And the last book, the question is all about every time coffee. In Singapore, do you have a favorite coffee place? Because I have one in Singapore.
A favorite coffee place?
Yeah?
Well, I don't drink coffee, but
Okay.
I there's a place
Tea
down the street
place?
from me that I meet a lot of people because I don't walk very well. So I say, if you want to meet, you got to come to near my house. And so I meet at this place, Tiangbaro Bakery,
Oh,
that
okay.
has coffee that people like. They seem to like it. I usually drink some juice or something.
That's good. I mean, coffee is one of my favorite things. So, I mean, I don't drink too much. I just drink one per day, but it's an important moment for me. And the last question is that the pictures that you have in your bag from your son, are they AI generated?
No,
Because
no,
they are
no,
beautiful.
no. He these are when he's much younger. No, he doesn't do it anymore, unfortunately. It's what the Singapore educational system does to you. It's all fill in the blank. And, you know, anything that he enjoyed, they won't let him do anymore because, you know, it's not considered useful for passing these exams.
Thanks so much for joining me this morning in Singapore. And I hope to talk to you again, maybe after the book is released.
Okay, well, my pleasure.